Hey guys, I have some very exciting game to show you in this video. As one of the strongest players in the world, Levon Aronian seems to be inspired by the Stafford Gambit. And that's very good news because the Stafford Gambit is one of the most exciting openings to try to play for a win with the black pieces. And Levon Aronian is playing with black in the very first round of the FIDE Grand Swiss on the Isle of Man against my fellow countryman Max Warmerdam. And Max played the move 1c4, and now you're thinking, well, this is not how we get the Stafford Gambit. Yeah, that is true. Levon Aronian didn't play the Stafford Gambit, but he got inspired. And just you to show you what the Stafford Gambit is, of course you should know, I will cover it many more times on this channel, of course. But normally the Stafford Gambit is reached by the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, Better of defense it's called now, but after knight takes e5, rather than kicking the knight away, black sacrifices a pawn here with the move knight c6. Knight takes, d takes c6. Basically you're saying, okay, white, you have a nice center, but I'm going to develop very quickly. There are a lot of attacking ideas here with the bishop coming, the knight coming out. The king can decide where it's going to castle, maybe queen side, maybe king side. You have open files and you're looking for piece activity. Keep that in mind, because even though we don't get to see the very same position in the game, it's very important to understand ideas because sometimes you can implement them in other variations as well. Look, Aronian played the move e5. Max goes for knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, and here the move e4 is played. This is a very popular line, and in the World Championship match played earlier this year between Ding Liren and Jan Nepomniachtchi, also the move bishop c5 was played, and now knight takes e5. This is very standard opening play, very modern line. After knight takes e5, the idea is that white will regain the piece with an open position, and that's very, very interesting, of course. But rather than automatically recapturing, Aronian goes for the move queen e7. That's a very rare move, has almost never been seen in practice, never been in grandmaster play. After knight takes c6, d takes c6, black is a pawn down, and you can see the similarities between the Stafford Gambit and this exact position. Of course, it's the very same pawn structure. Now black is about to win back the pawn, so white plays the move d3. And now, very important, you would like to play knight g4 here, attacking the pawn on f2. But the problem is that there is this move d4, and white deals with the threat of the pawn hanging on f2, attacks the bishop. And if you go for the move queen f6, which is a double attack on the pawn on d4 and the pawn on f2, white has the move bishop e3. And it seems to me that in a position like this, white is better. Maybe there's a bit of compensation, but white's pawn center looks quite impressive. White is a pawn up. So that's not what you want to play as black. But Aronian is very well prepared, of course, with such tricky idea. He played the move bishop e6. He's aiming just for completing its development. And one of the ideas now is that if white would play d4 to advance the pawn, to attack the bishop, well, then black is going to castle queenside with huge pressure on the d-file. The queen is misplaced here. Pawn on d4 is pinned. So that's excellent news for black. Max didn't play it. Instead, he went for the move bishop e2. Maybe a move like queen f3 could have been considered as well to move the queen to a more active square. But bishop e2 played. Castling queenside. Now black is about to take on c4 as the pawn on d3 is pinned. So queen c2 was played. Now the queen is no longer guarding the g4 square. Black goes for knight g4, intending to take on f2. So white is forced to take with the bishop. Bishop takes g4, and see that here white is still a pawn up, obviously. And it looks like the center is quite stable, but black is up in development. White played bishop f4, bringing the bishop out. And now the move f5. Black has to play fast here. Needs to put pressure on the center. So the move f5 was played, putting pressure on e4. But in certain cases, black is more interested in opening the f-file to put pressure on the bishop and the pawn on f2. White plays the move f3. supporting the pawn on e4, attacking the bishop on g4. And you would expect black to drop back with the bishop to h5. Or if you don't want to play that, maybe set up a counterattack with the move g5 to hit the bishop on f4. But here, the move rook h f8 was played, and that's a piece sacrifice by Aronian. By move 12, black is grabbing the initiative, and okay, you're about to open the f-file so that the bishop on f4 will be under threat, but the critical move is of course f takes g4. F takes e4 is played. Black is a piece down, but is intending to take the bishop on f4. And now if you try to save the bishop by going back to g3, black has the move e takes d3 with a discovered check. Black is winning the queen. This is one of the key ideas also in the Stafford Gambit. You try to open up the center so that your major pieces are coming alive, and white is suffering from its lack in development. What should white do? Well, in the game, Max felt he was under pressure and he decided to give back the piece with knight takes e4, allowing black to take with the rook on f4. That's, of course, a sort of concession, and black is now very happy with the outcome of the opening. The critical move here, that's difficult to figure out over the board all these consequences, is to play this move, d4, counterattacking the bishop. If you take on f4, then it's d takes c5, and because the pawn is still on e4, the white king is relatively safe, still in the center. Critical is rook takes d4, and now if you protect the bishop, there is rook d3, and okay, you're a piece up as white, but your king is stuck in the middle, and there are all sorts of attacking ideas. Maybe the bishop can come to d4, maybe the queen can come to b4, sometimes the queen can even come to h4. A lot of ideas here, and I would not be surprised if this all had been worked out by Aronian in his home preparation. Anyway, let's have a look. Knight takes e4 was played, rook takes f4, and now at least white is able to get its king out of the center, so the knight is able to move again, but black takes the pawn on g4. So material is even here, and the question is, should white capture on c5 or not? You know that in general a bishop is better in open positions, so if you would play a move like rook to e1, black will definitely keep this bishop on the board, and black is having a stable edge. But okay, you can also argue that this knight on e4 is holding the position together. It's not easy for the black rooks to infiltrate into white's position yet. Max decided instead to take on c5, and now if the queen takes c5, it's a position with major pieces only. And look, I really dislike white's queen side. The pawn on c4 is a really weakening pawn, and it also gives a nice square for a black rook on d4. White played king b1, and there's nothing immediate. There's no like a clear punch here for black, but it's like long-term problems. You got to defend your king side, your pawn on d3, and black can slowly improve its position with the move b6, rook f1, king b7. That's nice strategy. You have a nice pawn block to guard your king, so that later on white's major pieces have a difficult time to get access to the black king. Rook f3 play to protect the pawn one more time, and black improves its position. Goes for the move h5, white plays g3, black goes g5, queen e2 played, and now the rook comes back to d4. The rook is nicely anchored here. Their idea is to triple on the d file to attack the pawn on d3, maybe some pawn break later on the king side. I mean, with correct play, white should be able to hold probably, but it's an unpleasant position. And white played here to move rook e3, and I'm a little bit surprised that Levon Aronian didn't spot a tactic here. He could have taken the pawn on c4, because if you take on c4, it's rook takes d1. You're winning a pawn. After queen takes e1, it's queen takes e3. Maybe he was thinking there's queen takes h5, but there's queen d3. And this is probably just winning for black. You cannot go into the corner because of back rank mate. So if king c1, queen takes c4 check, looks like a technically winning endgame for black. But instead they follow the move g4. So the pawn on h5 is now safe, it's protected, cannot be taken. But okay, white has this option to play something like rook to e5. And now the queen is under threat. The pawn on h5 can be taken. Maybe queen d6 will be played. But at best, there is something like rook takes d3 and everything will get swapped. The pawn on h5 will be taken in the end. I don't think this is much for black at all. But Max instead played here the move a3. He's trying to create some luft for its king. I'm not sure what he was thinking. But there is rook takes c4. And it's winning a pawn because of the same idea. D takes c4, rook takes d1, queen takes e3. And here, black is just a healthy pawn up. Okay, it's a double pawn. It will not be simple to convert. But easy game. Black is more active with the queen. Extra pawn should be winning. Instead, Max played here the move rook e5. He didn't capture the rook on c4. Probably this is the move he had been counting on. That this is working here. Rook e5, guys. Because if the queen goes away, then you can take on c4. And there's no longer this rook hanging on e3. Probably Max had been counting on this, queen d6. And if you take now on c4, you can take on d1. But this endgame should just be okay because you're attacking the rook. If the rook goes away, the pawn on h5 will be taken. It's material even. That's it. White is saving this endgame. But Levon Aronian came up with a tricky move. This is absolutely beautiful. He played counter-attacking move rook to c2. So his queen is hanging, but he set up a counter-attack. This is a very unusual motive to set up a defense. The idea is that if queen takes rook, the rook on e5 is no longer protected. It's queen takes e5, black is a pawn up, and look at this ugly pawn on d3. That's terrible news for white. So, well, the thing is that, okay, you may move your queen away somewhere so that the queen is still under threat. If the queen goes away, the rook may be taken, but queen f2 protects the rook, attacks the pawn on b2. It's totally crushing. Therefore, Max Warmerdam played here rook takes c5. But now it's rook takes e2, rook takes h5. Material is even, but the second rook is coming into white's position. Rook f2 is coming next. King a2, rook f2, rook b1. You don't want to allow black to take that pawn on b2. But now there are so many weak pawns on d3 and on h2. Rook h4, rook takes d3, rook takes g4, rook takes h2. And this g pawn is going to drop as well because white doesn't have time to activate a rook. If you activate a rook, the pawn on b2 will be attacked one more time again. Rook h4 played, rook g2, rook h1, c5. You're not even in a rush. You can let that pawn there be on the board. Well, not too long after rook g1. Now you take on g3, rook takes. And it's an endgame of 4 versus 2. It's a double pawn, but it's just winning for black. The game went on for a few more moves. Rook c1, rook g4, rook h1, and now you're just going to advance the pawns. b5, the king is going to support as well. King b3, a4 check, king c2, now b4. With the idea to undouble the pawns after a b4, c b4 is just 3 versus 1. That's a very easy win. 2 versus 0 is also an easy win. In the game there followed rook f8, but now a very clever move by Aronian. He played b3, giving a check, and most importantly, fixing the pawn on b2. Here, white resigned. If you go king c3, it's rook g2, and on the next move, it's rook c2, check. The king has to give up the protection of the pawn on b2, and that's it. If you go back with the king to c1 instead, it's rook g1, king d2, and now a very typical way of picking up the pawn by attacking it with your rook. King comes to c3, rook check, king d3, rook c2, and the pawn on b2 will be taken next. An amazing game. It's not easy to win against a 2600 Grandmaster, but Levon Aronian did it with the help of the Stafford Gambit. Not exactly the Stafford Gambit opening, but he got inspired by ideas, and it's very nice to see such a top player implementing these opening ideas. Do you want to learn more about creative opening play or the Stafford Gambit or anything else? Make sure to subscribe to the channel because we will cover much more exciting games, especially from the ongoing tournament in the Isle of Man. So stay tuned and see you soon again. Bye bye.